The door opened with a bang, so violent that the noise echoed off the walls of the empty room. She walked in, her eyes shining with anger and despair, her hands shaking as she held her cell phone pointed at me. The screen glowed with an image that immediately made my stomach drop. I didn't want to believe what I saw, but it was there, in high definition, impossible to deny. It was my wife. My wife, laughing, touching his face intimately. His hands held her waist, as if she belonged to him. And, in the background of the image, that room. Our room. Her words came like a blow to the chest. You're seeing this, aren't you? Your wife and my husband. We can't leave it cheap. We need to do something. At that moment, everything in me froze. I wanted to scream, break my cell phone, deny reality, but the images were recorded in my mind. My wife. Our wedding. Our years together. Trampled. The air in the room became heavy, and I felt like I was suffocating, but I couldn't collapse in there. She hadn't just come to bring evidence. She had come to start a war. My eyes never left the image. That photo felt like a stab. I knew that smile of hers. It was the same smile that one day made me fall in love. Now, there, on the screen, he seemed to mock me. I needed to ask, even though I knew there was nothing more to be said, where did you get that? She laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was a bitter laugh, filled with pain. I followed them. I saw it with my own eyes. I knew. I felt it, and now I have proof. But this is not enough. We need to react. They won't get away with it. My mind was spinning, trying to process it all. I needed to think, I needed to breathe, but anger burned like fire in my veins. I wanted to confront them, destroy everything they had built together, every piece of that disgusting lie. But as I looked at the woman before me, I realized she was just as broken as I was. And for a moment, I felt like I wasn't alone. She wanted revenge. I wanted justice. And at that moment, I knew there was no going back. The images kept running through my head as she spoke. Her voice was a whirlwind of accusations and plans, but I couldn't stop thinking about every detail of that photo. The sheets. The pillow. Clothes scattered across the floor. That wasn't just any image. That was a declaration of war. My hands shook as I took her cell phone and enlarged the photo. I needed to be sure. I needed to find something that said this was all a mistake. But it wasn't. The bracelet on her wrist. His wedding ring. The way he held her face. I felt my heart shatter with every detail. And then, a question arose, why? What did I do to deserve this? How did I not see the signs? Her face, once full of tenderness, was now etched in my memory with contempt. The pain gave way to anger. And anger, desire. Not for forgiveness. No explanations. But of justice. She came over and grabbed my arm. We need to be smart. They underestimated us. They thought we would never find out. But now that we know, we can't let them walk away from this as if nothing had happened. Her voice was cold, calculating. But behind it, I could see the same desperation that consumed me. And I knew she was right. I wanted to act on impulse, but something inside me knew that this kind of betrayal required more than outbursts of anger. It required a plan. A plan to expose, destroy, and make them feel the same bitter taste that we were feeling at that moment. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about revenge. It was about taking back what they had taken from us, our dignity. I needed to regain control. And to do that, I would have to play their game. Better than them. She placed another photo in front of me. I could barely breathe as I saw the details. They were together in more places. Restaurants. Parks. Hotels. And then, I realized, this wasn't just a betrayal. This was a relationship. A second marriage hidden within my own marriage. I felt my throat close and my eyes burn, but I couldn't collapse. She noticed. You are not alone. I also want them to pay. And they will pay. But we need to be careful. They think they are safe. They think we are blind. Let's show that we are not. Let's take them down the right way. There was a sparkle in her eyes. A mix of pain and determination. I knew it went beyond the initial shock. It was the beginning of something bigger. And nothing would be able to stop it. The next few days were a blur. I looked at my cell phone every minute, waiting for some message, some apology. But all I got were lies. Fake smiles. Empty statements. And meanwhile, the plan took shape. Every detail carefully calculated to make them feel everything they had done. But the more I delved into that plane, the more I noticed something unsettling. Why hadn't I noticed before? Why, despite everything, was there still a part of me that wanted to believe this wasn't real? Maybe because accepting the truth meant accepting that my marriage was never what I thought it was. And that was the hardest part. Because if there was no more truth there, what was left for me? With each step we took in the plan, I felt the weight of betrayal lessen. Not because I was healing, but because I was focused on what came next. I wanted to see their faces when they found out everything had changed. I wanted to see the mask fall, the smiles disappear. But deep down, something told me that the real pain was yet to come. Because plans like this never end as we hope. And maybe, just maybe, I was about to discover secrets even darker than the photos that started it all. And that's when I realized. This story would not end with a simple confrontation. Because as I looked at the woman before me, I saw something in her eyes that made me question everything. Could I trust her? Or did she, in the end, also have something to hide? Welcome to the channel, where we uncover the darkest secrets of human relationships. Here, we make it clear, we do not support, in any way, any type of betrayal. The stories you will hear are fictional, but they carry real lessons about how betrayal can devastate lives, destroy trust and leave deep scars. Get ready to dive into a shocking narrative, full of twists and intense emotions. Now, take a deep breath and be ready, because this story is going to move you. The soft lights of the dining room reflected off the wine glasses on the oak table, creating small sparkles that danced across the surface. The house was completely silent, except for the distant sound of the clock on the wall that ticked off each second with unnerving precision. David ran his fingers along the rim of the glass, watching the red reflection of the wine swirling inside it. He wondered at what point the nights had become so empty, even when shared. Sitting across from her, Emily pushed her hair behind her ear and smiled, but the smile seemed more like a mechanical reflex than a genuine expression. They had been happy once, he knew that. He remembered the first years of their marriage, when they couldn't keep their hands off each other and conversations went on until dawn. Now, however, there was an emptiness that he couldn't name, as if something had gotten lost along the way and they were simply pretending not to notice. Emily got up to collect the dishes, and David watched her move. His gestures were still elegant, the lightness in his steps was still present, but there was an almost imperceptible stiffness that bothered him. He stood up too, offering to help, but she just smiled again and shook her head. No need, I'll take care of this, you can relax a little. He obeyed, but the weight in his chest didn't ease. He sat on the sofa and looked at the photos hanging on the wall. They were memories of trips, birthdays, moments that seemed otherworldly now. He wondered when was the last time they took a photo together. He tried to remember, but he couldn't. Emily reappeared in the room with a glass of wine and sat down next to him. They talked about trivial things, his work, her project at the company and the possible kitchen renovation. The conversation flowed, but the connection seemed forced, as if each person was trying to fill the silence out of obligation. Still, David clung to the hope that this was just a phase. Marriages went through ups and downs, everyone said that. But sometimes he wondered if theirs had started to fall and was just continuing to free fall. Over the next few days, David tried to ignore the feeling that something was wrong. He made an effort to be more present, taking Emily out to dinner and arranging little surprises like flowers and notes left on the bathroom mirror. Emily smiled and thanked him, but he felt that she was far away, as if she were trapped in another world, unreachable. At work, he tried to distract himself, immersing himself in endless reports and meetings, but the image of Emily always came back, hovering like a shadow. Emily also struggled to keep up appearances. She knew David was watching her, trying to decipher her thoughts, and it made her uneasy. She loved him, or at least wanted to believe she still did. But there was something inside her, an emptiness that grew every day, draining the energy she used to have. Try as I might, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. In the quiet moments, when David was at work and she was home alone, she felt a weight on her shoulders, a guilt she couldn't explain. She spent hours in the guest room, which she had turned into a small studio to paint, but lately not even art seemed enough to calm her. The nights, once full of laughter and conversations, had become monotonous. Emily went to bed earlier, claiming she was tired, while David stayed in the living room watching television or working on his laptop. Sometimes he would go up to her room and find her already asleep, her face calm but distant. He wondered if she missed him too, if she noticed the abyss that was opening between them, but he never asked. Time passed, and the small cracks in the relationship began to become more evident. Emily started spending more time away from home, citing work commitments and meetings with clients. David tried not to be suspicious, but the feeling that he was losing control began to grow. One night, after Emily arrived late, he asked her if everything was okay. She hesitated before answering, saying she was just overwhelmed with work. David wanted to believe it, but something in her expression made him doubt it. Despite his attempts to remain calm, he began to notice details that bothered him. Her cell phone seemed to always be glued to her hand, and messages arrived more frequently than before. When he asked who it was, she smiled and said they were work colleagues. But David felt something was wrong. He tried to push the thoughts away, telling himself he was being paranoid. Emily had never given him cause for distrust before, and he refused to believe anything could be happening. One night, Emily came home with a new dress, different from the ones she usually wore. She said it was for an important company event and asked David not to worry. He tried to praise, but the words came out forced. Emily noticed and approached him, kissing him on the cheek and whispering that she loved him. But even with the comforting words, David felt a chill down his spine. He stayed up late that night, waiting for Emily to call or text to say she was coming back, but the phone remained silent. The next morning, Emily acted as if nothing had happened. He prepared coffee, talked about his plans for the weekend and smiled like he always did. David tried to play along, but the feeling that something was wrong continued to gnaw at him. He found himself looking at her phone several times, but he knew that invading her privacy would be crossing a line he wasn't ready to cross. As the days passed, David began to question his own actions. Was he exaggerating? Was it just accumulated stress? But the doubts didn't go away. Emily was still acting impeccable, but there was something in her eyes, a shadow he couldn't ignore. Their relationship was built on trust, but now it seemed like every gesture, every word, was hiding something. David wondered if he was becoming paranoid or if he was about to discover something that would change everything. And deep down, a part of him feared the answer. He knew the truth could be painful, but he also knew he couldn't continue living with that doubt. That night, sitting on the sofa, he looked at the photos on the wall again. The smiles seemed so real, so full of hope. He wanted to go back to that time, to that feeling of security. But something inside him said that this was no longer possible. Something was about to be revealed, something he couldn't ignore. And although he didn't know it yet, the storm was just beginning. David woke up before dawn, his eyes fixed on the ceiling as he felt the weight of silence around him. Emily slept beside him, breathing softly, but the distance between them seemed greater than ever. He rolled over in bed, trying to find comfort in the mattress, but restlessness consumed him. Every detail of the last few days came back to him, like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't put together. Her evasive gaze, the extended hours at work, the muffled laughter on the cell phone, everything seemed to be piling up, forming an invisible barrier between them. He got up slowly so as not to wake her and went downstairs, where he found refuge in the kitchen. He made himself a strong coffee, but the bitterness did nothing to ease the knot in his stomach. Sitting at the table, he held the cup tightly, as if the heat could calm his trembling hands. Emily appeared minutes later, her hair messy and a slight smile on her face. She leaned over to kiss him on the forehead, but the gesture was quick, distant. He watched her move around the kitchen, picking up her cup and scrolling through her phone as she waited for the coffee to be ready. David noticed the glow on the screen reflecting in her eyes and felt his chest tighten. When Emily noticed him looking, she turned the device upside down and smiled. Something about that made him look away, trying to ignore the wave of distrust that threatened to rise. They talked about trivial things, but every word seemed rehearsed. He tried to stay focused, but the feeling that something was wrong grew every moment. When she left for work, David stood in the kitchen, staring at the empty chair where Emily had been minutes before. The following days were a test of David's nerves. Emily started arriving later and later, always with excuses about meetings and tight deadlines. He tried not to question her, but his uneasiness grew. Sometimes he would take out his cell phone to check her social media, but he wouldn't find anything out of the ordinary. Still, the feeling that he was being deceived persisted. One night, while Emily was taking a shower, her cell phone vibrated on the nightstand. David looked at the screen, and the name that appeared made his heart skip a beat. He didn't recognize the number, but the message simply said, "I miss you." Heat rose to his face as he tried to decide what to do. He picked up his cell phone, but as he did so, he heard the sound of the shower turning off. He quickly put the device back on and left the room, feeling cold sweat running down the back of his neck. Emily came out of the bathroom wrapped in a towel, her hair dripping and the soft scent filling the room. She smiled when she saw him, but David felt her smile like a cutting blade. He wanted to ask about the message, wanted to confront her, but the words wouldn't come. Emily continued to get ready, as if nothing was wrong, and David felt suffocated. He needed answers, but he feared what he might find out. That night he could barely sleep. Her every movement in bed seemed to echo in his mind, like a constant reminder that something was wrong. Over the next few days, David began to observe Emily more closely. He noticed that she dressed up more to go out, wore perfumes that were previously saved for special occasions and spent more time on her cell phone. When I asked about work, she looked away and changed the subject. He tried to push away the thoughts, but the distrust grew. Then, one night, Emily said she needed to travel to a corporate event and would be gone for 2 days. David nodded, but something inside him snapped. As soon as she left, he decided he could no longer ignore how he felt. He took her cell phone while it was charging in the living room and started looking for it. Every message he read made his heart beat faster. There were deleted conversations, inconsistent schedules and photos that, while not incriminating, suggested intimacy with someone he didn't know. When he found the name that appeared most frequently, he felt the floor disappear. It was a coworker, someone she mentioned from time to time but had never been a cause for concern. Now, however, the affectionate nicknames and messages sent late at night told a different story. David felt his hands shake and dropped the cell phone on the table, as if the object was burning. He sat down, breathing deeply, trying to process what he had just discovered. When Emily returned from her trip, David could no longer hide his discomfort. She noticed, but pretended not to notice. He, on the other hand, watched her every move, every word, every gesture. Until, one night, after yet another excuse to go out, David decided to follow her. He felt ashamed for acting this way, but the need for answers was greater than his pride. He followed her to a downtown restaurant and parked across the street. His heart was beating fast as he watched her enter the room. Minutes later, she saw a man approach her and kiss her on the face. They sat together, and the intimacy between them was evident. David felt his stomach drop. He wanted to go into the restaurant, confront them right there, but he knew he couldn't control his anger. Instead, he took out his cell phone and took photos. Each click was like a stab in the chest, but he needed proof. He returned home before her, feeling empty. When Emily arrived, acting as if nothing had happened, David felt his anger rise. She smiled, kissed him on the cheek and asked how his day had been. He held his breath, trying to stay calm, but he couldn't respond. He just looked at her, and Emily noticed. The smile slowly disappeared, and a heavy silence took over the room. She tried to ask what was wrong, but David simply left the room, leaving her alone. Over the next few days, he avoided confronting her. Instead, he delved even deeper into the investigation. He discovered that the man Emily was seeing was married, and his wife seemed to know nothing. David felt a mixture of pity and anger. He knew he needed to do something, but he wasn't sure how to act. Until, one rainy afternoon, he heard the doorbell ring. When he opened the door, he found a woman standing, holding a cell phone, and her eyes were red. She lifted the device and showed the photo. David felt the ground disappear once again. Before he could say anything, she spoke, her voice firm but full of pain. "This needs to stop. They cannot get away with it. We need to do something." David looked at the photo again, and pain washed over him. He knew that nothing would be the same as before. But I also knew that that story was far from over. David stared at his cell phone in silence, his hands shaking as he enlarged the image the woman had just shown him. He couldn't look away. It was as if his eyes were locked on that moment, on that scene that made him feel like the ground had been ripped out from under him. Emily was there, in the arms of another man, the same man he now knew was married to the woman before him. Her words still echoed in his mind. "They cannot get away with it. We need to do something." Her voice trembled, but carried a sharp firmness, as if that phrase had been rehearsed and stored for too long. David tried to respond, but the words stuck in his throat. He knew he needed to say something, but all he could do was nod slightly, as if that was enough to acknowledge the chaos that was now taking over their lives. The woman in front of her let out a heavy sigh and ran her hands through her hair, trying to contain the tears that threatened to fall. She kept talking, and David felt every word like a blow. "I was silent for too long. I suspected it, but I always convinced myself it was all in my head. I refused to accept it. Until yesterday. Yesterday I saw it with my own eyes. I followed him to a hotel. I stood on the sidewalk for over an hour, looking at that door, trying to find the courage to enter. And when I finally entered..." She swallowed hard, struggling to continue. "I saw the two of them in the lobby, laughing, as if nothing mattered. As if we didn't exist." David felt his stomach drop. He had already imagined scenes like that in his head, but hearing the details made everything more real, more cruel. Emily arrived home late that night, not knowing what awaited her. She opened the door with the same light smile as always, but stopped as soon as she saw David and the woman sitting in the living room. His eyes widened, and the smile instantly disappeared. "What's going on here?" Her question came with a forced attempt to remain calm, but David noticed the tremor in her voice. He stood up slowly, approaching her, and felt his heart race when he saw the fear in Emily's eyes. Something inside him broke at that moment, but anger kept his hands steady. "Do you want to tell me what's going on?" She took a step back, her eyes switching between him and the woman sitting on the couch. "I don't know what you're talking about. Is this some kind of joke?" David laughed, but the sound was filled with bitterness. "Joke?" He picked up his cell phone from the table and showed the photo. Do you think this looks like a joke? Emily turned pale. She looked at the photo, then at David, and for a moment he thought she was going to deny it. But then she lowered her head, and the silence that followed was like confirmation. The woman on the couch stood up, approaching Emily with teary eyes. How could you do this? With my husband? With yours? Her voice broke at the end, but Emily didn't respond. David felt his blood boil. Say something. You must have something to say, shouldn't you? A reason? A justification? Because, honestly, I can't understand it. Emily looked up, her eyes shining with tears. I don't know what to say. I'm sorry. That was all he could say, and David felt his stomach drop. He expected anything, desperate apologies, justifications, even anger, but not that submission. Not that surrender. The woman next to him let out a nervous laugh. Are you sorry? And that? Is that all you have to say after destroying 2 marriages? Emily tried to get closer, but David stepped forward, blocking her way. No. Don't try to turn it into something smaller than it is. Don't try to make it look like an impulsive mistake, because this. He pointed to the photo. This is not a slip-up. This is by design. Calculated. He felt his voice crack, but continued. I trusted you. I dedicated my life to us, to what we had. And you. You threw it all away. Why? Emily finally reacted, her eyes filling with anger. Do you want to know why? Because I felt invisible. Because as much as you were here physically, you weren't with me. I felt alone in our marriage. David felt the impact of those words, but he didn't let his anger subside. So instead of talking, instead of trying to fix it, you chose this? Did you choose lies, hidden meetings, betrayal? Emily was crying now, but he couldn't feel sorry. I know I made a mistake. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I just wanted to feel something again. I just wanted to remember what it was like to be wanted, to be noticed. David shook his head, unable to believe what he was hearing. And what do you think I wanted? Do you think I didn't feel the same things? But I stayed. I fought for us. I tried. Emily was silent, and the woman next to them finally exploded. I don't want to hear anything else. I just want you both to know that this doesn't end here. She turned to David. We will resolve this. Together. Emily tried to get closer again, but David backed away. No. I can't look at you right now. I can't even stay in the same house as you. Take your things and leave. Emily tried to argue, but his voice cut through the air. Skirt. She looked at him one last time before grabbing her bag and heading out the door. The silence that followed was deafening. David sat on the couch, feeling the weight of the moment finally settle on him. The woman next to him sat down too, and they sat there, not saying a word, as the reality of the betrayal echoed in every corner of the house. But even in that silence, there was something in her eyes, something that David couldn't ignore. He knew the betrayal was just the beginning. I knew there was more to that story. And whatever it was, he was about to find out. David sat on the couch for a long time after Emily left, staring at the empty space where she had been minutes before. The silence in the room seemed deafening, filled only by the echo of the words that had been spoken. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to absorb everything that had happened, but the images came back with force, bringing the pain and anger back. The woman next to him, still holding the cell phone with the revealing photo, sighed heavily and broke the silence. We need to talk about this. We need to think about what to do now. David turned to face her, and for the first time he noticed the tiredness in her eyes, the same tiredness he felt in himself. He got up and walked to the kitchen, needing a moment to breathe. She followed him, leaning on the counter as she waited for a response. He poured a glass of water and took a sip before finally speaking. I still can't believe it. I look at that photo, I hear her words, and it still feels like I'm trapped in some nightmare that I can't wake up from. She crossed her arms and nodded slowly. I know exactly how you feel. But we need to be rational now. We cannot let anger blind us. We need to act intelligently. David let out a short, bitter laugh. Intelligence? I spent months ignoring the signs. I convinced myself that it was okay, that she would never do something like that. And now you want me to be rational? The woman approached, placing a firm hand on his arm. Yes, rational. Because if we act on impulse, they win. They continue with their perfect lives while we remain destroyed. Do you want this? Because I don't want to. David looked at her and saw something in her eyes that made him stop. Determination. She wasn't there to fall apart. She was there to fight. They spent the next few hours talking, coming up with a plan that seemed increasingly necessary. Emotions were still raw, but the need to regain control was beginning to overwhelm the pain. When night fell, David realized that the silence in the house no longer suffocated him in the same way. He was focused. There was something moving now, something that kept him from sinking. But there were still unanswered questions, and he knew he needed to confront Emily again to get them. The next morning, David sent a short message to Emily, asking her to come back and get her things. He expected her to respond with resistance, but to his surprise, she immediately agreed. When she arrived, the tension in the room was almost palpable. Emily entered slowly, eyes downcast, avoiding eye contact. David crossed his arms and waited. She started to pick up some clothes and personal items, but he couldn't keep quiet for long. Won't you say anything? Aren't you going to try to explain why you did that? She stopped, her hands shaking as she held on to a blouse. I've already said everything I had to say. I was wrong. I know that. But nothing I say now will change how you feel. David felt his anger rising again, but he took a deep breath and tried to control himself. Is that all? You destroyed everything we built together, and that's all you have to say. She finally looked at him, and her eyes were full of tears. I didn't want it to end like this. I didn't plan this. But I'm also not the same person I was when we got married. I got lost along the way, and you got lost too. I tried to ignore it for so long, but there came a point where I no longer knew who I was. David shook his head, her words feeling like knives cutting into his skin. So you decided to find who you were in the arms of another man? She looked down again, but didn't respond. Instead, he continued to gather his things, as if that would end the conversation. But David wasn't ready to let it end like that. Before she left, he blocked her way and looked into her eyes. You are hiding something. I know that. And I'm going to find out what it is. Emily tried to get past him, but David didn't move. She finally gave up and backed away, quickly wiping away her tears. I can't do this anymore. I've already caused enough pain. Please let me go. David felt the anger being replaced by a deeper sensation, something close to despair. But before he could say anything, Emily left, leaving him alone once again. In the following days, David dedicated himself to discovering the truth. He would revisit the messages he had found on her cell phone, analyze every detail of the photos and look for any clue that could fill in the gaps in the story. The lover's wife remained in contact, sharing new information whenever she discovered something. Little by little, the two began to realize that there was more than simple betrayal involved. David found documents Emily had left behind, including bank statements and receipts he had never seen before. They showed significant spending on hotels, restaurants and even expensive gifts. But what caught his attention was a recurring payment to an account he didn't recognize. He took the information to his lover's wife, and together they began to uncover the details of the case. They discovered that Emily's lover had a history of financial manipulation. He had been fired from his previous job for embezzling money and, it seemed, was using Emily to continue supporting his lifestyle. David felt his stomach drop as he realized that Emily probably had no idea she was being used. He knew he needed to tell her, but he also knew this conversation wouldn't be easy. When he finally found her again, Emily was visibly shaken. She looked tired, as if the last few days had drained her of all her strength. David wasted no time. "I know what's going on. I know about the money. About payments. And I know he's manipulating you." Emily went pale, eyes wide. "What? What are you talking about?" David threw the papers on the table. "That. Look. He's using you, Emily. Did you think he cared about you? He just wanted your money." She took the papers with shaking hands, reading each line as tears began to fall. "No. That can't be true. He wouldn't do that to me." David felt his anger subside a little as he watched the pain in her eyes. But he couldn't let compassion dominate him. "And truth. And now you need to decide what you are going to do. Because I won't let him continue to destroy us." Emily looked at him, pain and guilt written all over her face. "I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fix this." David approached, his voice firmer now. "So you better find out. Because I won't stop until I put an end to this." As Emily cried in front of him, David felt something shift inside him. He was still hurt, but now he had a purpose. He wouldn't let that story end with him being the victim. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was regaining control. But I knew the worst was yet to come. David felt the weight of silence around him as he stared at Emily, who was still holding the papers with shaking hands. She kept reading and rereading the information as if waiting for the words to change before her eyes. Tears were streaming down her face, but he no longer felt the same anger as before. Now, what dominated him was a mix of frustration and despair. Emily finally dropped the papers on the table and looked at him, her eyes red and puffy. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. He made me believe in everything. Told me I was special. It made me feel alive again. And now I realize it was all a lie." David crossed his arms and kept his gaze fixed on her. "And what did you expect? That I felt sorry? That I would just forget all this? You destroyed our marriage because of an illusion." She lowered her head and covered her face with her hands. "I know. I know I destroyed everything. But I was also destroyed. I completely lost myself. And now I don't know how to get out of this." David walked away and began pacing back and forth, trying to organize his thoughts. He wanted to scream, he wanted to explode, but he knew that wouldn't change what had already happened. When he stopped, he looked at Emily again and noticed something different about her. She was no longer the same confident woman who had betrayed him. It looked broken, like it was about to fall apart. But even so, he couldn't forget everything that had happened. "I can't just let this go. I need to know everything. I need to understand what made you do this." Emily looked up and took a deep breath before starting to speak. "It all started slowly. I felt invisible. I felt like you didn't see me anymore. And then he appeared, saying all the things I needed to hear. It was as if I had woken up from a dream. But now I see it was just another lie." David clenched his fists and tried to control his anger. "Are you saying I'm to blame? That I pushed you into this?" She shook her head quickly. "No. I'm not saying that. I just want you to understand how I felt. I know that nothing justifies what I did, but I didn't know how to continue living that way." He approached, his eyes fixed on hers. "And you think I knew? Do you think I didn't feel the same doubts, the same fears? The difference is that I stayed. I tried to fix it. I didn't run away into someone else's arms. Emily looked down again, and the silence between them grew heavy. The lover's wife arrived minutes later, interrupting the tension. She brought with her new documents and messages that confirmed the financial scam that her husband had set up. Emily picked up the papers and began leafing through them, each new piece of information causing her expression to become darker. He used my money. He used me to pay his bills. I was an idiot. David felt a pang of satisfaction at seeing Emily finally see the truth, but he also felt sorry. As much as she had been wrong, it was now clear that she too had been manipulated. The lover's wife crossed her arms and faced Emily. And what are you going to do now? Will you continue hiding? Or will you face it head on? Emily took a deep breath and looked at David. I need to fix this. I need to try to do something. David took a step back, feeling the weight of her words. And how do you think you're going to do that? How do you think you can fix something like this? She approached, her eyes pleading. I don't know. But I'm willing to try. Just tell me what I need to do. David turned to his lover's wife and exchanged a quick look with her before responding. You will help bring him down. It will help us expose everything he did. And then you will face the consequences of what you did to me. Emily nodded, and David saw something different about her. Determination. Maybe it was too late for their marriage, but at least she was willing to fight for redemption. In the following days, they began to gather evidence against their lover. Emily was the linchpin, providing information only she could access. David watched her closely, analyzing her every move, trying to understand if she was truly sorry or just trying to save her own skin. The lover's wife was also involved, torn between anger and the need for justice. One night, while they were analyzing the documents, Emily looked at David and finally said what he didn't expect. I never stopped loving you. Even when I was with him, I thought about you. I know this doesn't change anything, but I needed to say it. David felt a lump in his throat, but he didn't respond. He knew her words were sincere, but he didn't know if it was enough. When they finally had enough evidence, David and his lover's wife decided to confront the man together. Emily insisted on being present, but David hesitated. He didn't know if he could trust her at this crucial moment. But in the end, he relented, feeling he needed to see her take responsibility for her actions. The meeting took place in a discreet restaurant, where the lover did not expect to be confronted. When he saw the three of them walking in, he was visibly nervous, but tried to maintain his composure. His wife was the first to speak. You lied to me. He used our marriage, our money, and even had the courage to destroy another family. He tried to explain himself, but David placed the papers on the table, cutting off any attempt at an excuse. It's all here. Every payment, every lie. Do you think you can get away with it? Her lover began to sweat, and Emily finally spoke. I believed in you. I trusted you. And you destroyed me. But that ends here. He tried to get up, but David blocked his way. Not so fast. We have already contacted a lawyer. You will pay for everything you did. The lover began to beg, but no one gave in. David felt a rush of satisfaction as he watched him lose control, but he also felt a weight in his chest. None of that erased what had happened. Nothing brought back what was lost. When they finally left the restaurant, David looked at Emily and realized that, despite her regret, the road to healing would still be long. In the following days, the case against her lover progressed, and Emily continued to help, but David knew that something inside him had changed forever. The trust was broken, and he didn't know if he would ever get it back. As he watched Emily struggle to make things right, he also began to wonder if he could find a new way to move forward. He knew that their story wasn't over yet, but he also knew that the ending would be different from what he had once imagined. David walked slowly down the courtroom hallway, feeling the weight of each step. The sound of Emily's heels echoed behind him, a constant reminder that despite everything they had faced together over the past few months, there was a gulf between them that might never be bridged. She kept her head down, avoiding his gaze, as she had been doing since their last tense conversation at their house. The lover's wife, now with a firmer and more confident posture, walked next to Emily, but the distance between them was also evident. The trial was about to begin, and David knew that this would be the final chapter of that story, at least for him. Inside the room, the lover sat with his shoulders slumped and his eyes fixed on the floor. He looked smaller, more fragile than David remembered. The man who had destroyed his marriage and manipulated Emily now seemed stripped of all arrogance, reduced to a defendant awaiting a verdict. When the judge entered and the trial began, David felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. The evidence was all there, the bank statements, the compromising messages, the records of fraudulent transactions. Emily had collaborated with every detail, giving everything she knew, and her lover's wife had been relentless in exposing her husband's manipulative nature. While the lawyers presented their arguments, David watched Emily. She looked fragile, but there was something different about her expression, as if she had finally accepted responsibility for her choices. When it was her turn to testify, David felt his stomach drop. She took the witness stand and spoke in a firm but emotional voice. She admitted her mistakes, acknowledged the role she had played in destroying 2 marriages and described how she had been manipulated. She didn't try to victimize herself, but she also didn't hide the pain she felt from being used. David saw tears run down her face and felt a pang of compassion, but he knew that didn't erase the past. When the trial ended and the lover was convicted, the room slowly emptied. Emily remained seated for a moment before finally standing up and facing David. She opened her mouth to speak, but he raised his hand, asking for silence. "Not here. Let's get out of here first." They walked outside together, but the weight of what still needed to be said felt greater than ever. The lover's wife said goodbye quickly, leaving them alone. Emily finally broke the silence, her voice low and hesitant. "I know nothing I say now can erase what happened, but I need you to know that I regret everything. I regret hurting you, destroying our trust. I know you will never forgive me completely, and I accept that. But I want you to know that I will carry this guilt forever." David took a deep breath, fighting the wave of emotions her words stirred. "I don't know if I can forgive. Not now. Maybe never. But I also can't keep living in the past. I need to move on." Emily nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I understand. And I hope you find the happiness that I couldn't give you." He didn't respond. He just turned and started walking away. Each step felt heavier, but at the same time, he felt a sense of release. This wasn't a new beginning, but at least it was an end. Over the next few months, David began to rebuild his life. He moved to a new apartment and immersed himself in work, trying to fill the void left by the end of his marriage. Little by little, he started going out again, meeting new people, but he kept the scars from that period as a constant reminder. The lover's wife also moved on, finalizing her divorce and focusing on her career. They remained in contact for a while, supporting each other as they dealt with the remains of the chaos left behind by their partners. Emily tried to rebuild her life, but the guilt and consequences of her choices followed her. She sought therapy, tried to reconnect with friends and family, but the marks she left on her own path continued to haunt her. Eventually, he moved to another city, looking for a fresh start, but he was never able to completely free himself from the weight of his past. As for the lover, his conviction brought more than just the loss of freedom. He was publicly exposed, lost his job, his marriage and any shred of respect he might have had. While serving his sentence, he was forced to face his own ruin, with no one willing to reach out to help him. David, on the other hand, found something unexpected. One quiet afternoon, while walking through a park, he met someone. It wasn't like the movies, no fireworks or background music, but it was simple and genuine. A light conversation that turned into an invitation for coffee and then into something more. He wasn't ready to dive into a new relationship right away, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he could breathe again. As the months passed, David realized that the pain of the past was being left behind. He still carried the lessons he learned, but he no longer allowed them to define who he was. The betrayal had destroyed part of him, but it had also revealed his strength. He moved forward knowing that he would never again ignore the signs, that he would never again accept less than he deserved. Emily, for her part, never tried to get in touch again. She knew David needed that distance to heal, and maybe she needed the same. The lover remained trapped in his choices, reflection of the inevitable consequences of his actions. And the woman who once shared David's pain followed her own path, rebuilding her life and finding her own way to move forward. The story ended, but the marks it left remained. David found a new beginning, not without scars, but with the knowledge that he had survived. He had been betrayed, destroyed and rebuilt. And, in the end, he came out stronger than he imagined. If you made it this far, leave your comment telling us what you thought of this story. Your opinion is very important to us. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories like this. We reinforce that this channel does not support any type of betrayal. Our goal is to show how wrong choices can destroy lives and how the consequences can be irreversible. Until the next story.